Welcome back to Rustic Work. So today we're going to talk about early chainsaws. So most people know I like working on chainsaws. I have a lot of videos of them, and I do many antiques, but chainsaws I do because, one, I like cutting firewood, and I do some woodwork, but mostly they are fun winter projects for somebody like me who likes to tinker on something. I don't necessarily want to go out and tinker on my tractors out in the snow or in the shed, but I can fire a wood stove up in the barn and I can work on these chainsaws. So today we're going to go through 4 early 1951 to 53 chainsaws. These were all built at the exact same time. What's unique about these chainsaws is they did not have diaphragm carburetors. And if you don't realize what a diaphragm carburetor does for a saw, a chainsaw will run in any directions, upside down, on the side, anything. And that is because it has I have a good one, don't have the cover off that, so it has a diaphragm carburetor. Diaphragm carburetor gives you the ability for the carb, it doesn't matter what angle the carb is at, it draws fuel and runs correctly. These carburetors use a traditional float carburetor that you would find on your tiller, your lawnmower, things of that nature. So these 4 companies all had their unique own designs to combat how do you fell trees with a float carburetor. So this home line I am working on is currently half apart. This is actually the flywheel to it. I'm cleaning the points. And if anybody ever knows, I use a 38 piston, a new old stock Ford piston to hold my screws and stuff. So I've always wanted one of these. I finally got one, and I got a good deal on it. I have all the covers, they're just currently off. So this is the 26 LCS. Now this is a great example of an early home-like chainsaw that, in my opinion, really put them on the map in chainsaw manufacturing. Chainsaws were not practical up till the 40s. They just hadn't come out with a design that could be handheld with one person and run. Now, IEL, if I remember, introduced what's called the Beaver, and it was introduced in 46 or 47, right after World War II. Now, it was considered the first practical one-man chainsaw. Sorry. It was 35 pounds. And for those who don't love chainsaws normally around, your newer chainsaws are around the 10-pound mark. And anything over 14-15 pounds starts getting extremely heavy fast. People don't realize how much it wears on you. Plus, none of these saws have any form of anti-vibe on them. Doesn't sound like it makes a big difference. Makes a huge difference if you're going to run one all day. This saw has a 2-foot bar. It is a reduction drive chainsaw. It has obviously your clutch. The cover is sitting somewhere. And it is belt drive. Now these early home lights use belt drive. I don't know why the reasoning. I don't know what the cause. Somebody out there may know. Be interested to learn. But a lot of early chainsaws, everything here is gear drive with the exception of one. Gear drive was just because they hadn't built a powerful enough engine, basically power to weight ratio just wasn't there for direct drives, and they couldn't get the chains to spin fast enough, and they were still working on what the best chain size was per application. This uses very large chain, 9/16. If you're going to get into this type of hobby or want something to mess with, you can go to your tractor show, your local flea market. Occasionally you'll see a chainsaw sitting there. If it has a bad chain on it or no chain on it and it is an antique chainsaw and you don't know about it, I'd stay away from it. Not unless it's a very rare unit. Now, if I had found this without a bar and chain, I would have considered still buying it. It's a pretty rare saw. I wouldn't say rare, they just seem to bring good money. Now, the chains on all of these saws have not been produced for over 50 years, so finding them is impossible anymore. But anyway, oil pump, your reduction drive, I believe it is 3-to-1. I'd have to look it up. Your chain, 2-foot bar. Now these are supposed to be pretty stout. They rated them up to a 60-inch bar, if I recall. But your throttle, your carb unit, and you have a long fuel line. you push, if I'm correct, this lever down and you can rotate this handle over to allow you to fell a tree, since it's still using a float carburetor. Tank stays stationary, everything else pretty much stays stationary, but the handle and the carburetor itself. It's not really a bad setup, and it was successful for its time period. And for 109 cc's, this saw really isn't that heavy compared to a couple others I have in this type of class. 100 plus cc's tend to be 30-pound chainsaws, especially from the 50s. So, compliments on that. Home lights were one of the first. For those who don't know, they use chrome-plated bores. This is a chrome-plated bore chainsaw, where I will have to double check, but I believe all the other ones I have here are sleeved. They still use a cast iron sleeve. Doesn't sound like it makes a big difference, but when you're dropping multiple pounds off a chainsaw, that's a pretty big deal. So we'll go on to our next unit, which is a personal favorite of mine, and I love this. I got this on trade from a very good friend of mine. We actually ended up trading some David Bradley garden tractors for him. This is an IEL HB 77 cc's. IEL became Pioneer, and Pioneer was a pretty big name. Now IEL was a really big name there in the 40s and the early 50s. I mean, they came out with a one-man chainsaw unit, you know, and that was a big deal. People don't realize that these saws, even though they weigh 30 pounds, is a lot better than cutting wood with a crosscut saw. So this one's unique in the fact that it is a direct drive unit. HBs here, like this, are direct drive. This is a good unit, original paint, decals are still on it. Now, this does very well for a 50s era chainsaw that's direct drive. This is probably the best direct drive from this era I have ever messed with personally. It has just enough power to pull the chain that it's running, and it does okay. It's rated at 4,200 RPMs on chain, which, if most of you don't know, most modern saws are over 10,000 without chain. Free spin is generally well over 10,000. Now this is set at 4,200 operating speed. It runs good, it works, but their solution to the how do you get around the float carburetor is your float, your air filter, your fuel tank, the whole handle assembly here. Now the pin is wore out, so it wobbles a little. I have not gotten around to taking it apart to replace. I have to make a new one, but you pull the lever on the bottom, there's your 45. There's your straight 90. Well, you said 105. Now, and the nice thing about that is you can go the other way with it, which the other saws, only one can do that. So, one other saw. So, this is kind of unique. Now, the disadvantage of this is it's extremely front heavy. You're rotating a 4 or 5 pound piece versus a 20 pound piece. It's very front heavy, awkward to get used to, awkward to handle. Your oil pump is here, throttle, fuel tank. This one does not seem to have a throttle lock. I'm not going to say it never had one, but there is just no provisions I have ever found that have a throttle lock. But it does have a foot plate for pull starting, which makes it much easier to start versus some of the other ones. Great example of an early IEL. I enjoy this one. This one's fun to get out. Now, here we are on to my David Bradley or Strunk saw. Strunk is the manufacturer. David Bradley is who sold this one. Strunk also made these, but they were red. I don't want to say it's a bad design, but even compared to these other ones, this one is by far the most awkward and hardest to run. It's not that it's bad, it's just the other designs were superior. I understand why this design did not stay around. When you're comparing other designs of the same era, and this one's already outclassed. This one does have an automatic oiler. You simply open the vent cap here, and it just basically dumps oil while it's running. Not very good, but it is true. Doing it itself, you don't do anything. So this saw does run. All of these do but the home light. I'm missing my top air cover. I will have to fabricate something. This is 77 cc's, same class as the IEL. The IEL outperforms it, and I don't know if that is because I have never been able to get this one to run what I would define as 100%. The carburetor sits at a 45-degree angle on this, which is pretty unique for its own class, because Strunk, instead of making any moving parts, they put the carburetor at a stationary point at a 45-degree angle. Maybe that's why I can never get it to run right. Maybe it was just a bad design. It cuts okay, but it just doesn't seem to do as well as the others. And they all, if I remember, I will have to check the home light, but they all use the same style carburetor. So, since your carb's at a 45-degree angle, it does give you the ability for a down cut, because the motor can still run and work. But since it sits at a 45-degree angle, you can rotate it only one direction, which is this way, to make your cut if you're felling a tree. So, kind of its own thing. I think it was one of those simplified fixes, and it does work, but this saw without the bar is 28 pounds. All the others are lighter, and they have more versatility in cutting wood at an angle. I don't understand why they built this saw so heavy when the other companies were already building rotating assemblies that were lighter. So, Strunk saw, cool saw. This one's badge David Bradley, that's why it's yellow. David Bradley went on to basically building their own chainsaws up till when they went out of business in '67. They also built some killer garden tractors, really fun to work on, really fun to play with. But, Strunk saw, another example of a float carburetor for a chainsaw. And here is another good example of a saw you see occasionally out there in the collecting world, a Maul 12A. Mauls were really popular for a few years. I mean, crazy popular. And it's like, I almost feel like they just fell off the market. I don't know what happened there. Obviously wasn't in that era. So their fix to this whole solution is, as you can see, the motor sits this way, the crank runs this way. Now, the 12A, the OMG, the 2MG, they're all set up the same way. But since it had a float carburetor, how do you get around felling the tree? Well, they did a swarm drive gear in the front. That allowed you to rotate this unit over using this lock. Now, I did have to adjust some of this, but the cool part is since it's like that, you can set it at any angle you want because it's literally just able to rotate. I have never rotated it completely upside down and tried to cut. I don't think the oiler would work. This is also an automatic oiler. Same kind of idea as that. You don't do anything, but it just dumps oil out on the bar. I mean, in the 50s, it would have been pretty cool, but I don't think it works as good. This guy does run, but he's pretty weak. He's wore out. I just can't get parts for him. I don't really want to cannibalize a good running 12A to fix this one. It just depends what I can find. But this one runs. I cut wood with it. I've cut wood with the Strunk. The IEL, I've actually got a good video of using the side cut with it. Home light, hope to have it running in the next few days. But that is your walk down of a couple early 1951 to 50. These were all built between 51 and 53 chainsaws. These all competed against each other on the chainsaw market. It shows what there still is. These saws all had different designs, and honestly, they all worked. It's just, if I had to pick a favorite, I don't have one because they all had some really bad problems. The IEL is considerably front heavy. The Maul is probably the most practical one of them, but it's still heavy. So, and I've never experienced it with a good rebuilt engine. That may be the best one, but I don't have a rebuilt engine. May have been why they were so popular. But if you want to get into this hobby of chainsaws, which if you want something to winter do and you're like me, you like tinkering on stuff, it's a good hobby. But try to find them with chains and bars. And I would garner to say that 8 out of 10 of them just need carb work or points clean. I've lost count at how many chainsaws people are like, well, it don't run and don't work, and all it needed was carb diaphragms or the points cleaned or the carburetor cleaned out and fired right up. So all these were that way. Home light obviously is still in the works. I did get it to fire the other day, but it's got weak sparks, so I'm going to clean the points out and try to work on it some more. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it gave you a little information and insight into early 1950s chainsaws and their unique designs prior to diaphragm carburetors.